Survivor specialist Phil and Alexa are back with episode 6 of our classic Survivor series. And today we are talking about one of the most iconic moments from the show. Girls Gone Wilder, the episode best known for Heidi and Jenna getting naked for chocolate and peanut butter. If you are easily offended in today's day and age, this is not the episode for you, but boy, is this a great episode. And on a rewatch, the full story is so important. The full story is just so important because ultimately at the end of this episode, which would be so frowned upon today with girls getting naked for chocolate and peanut butter, it is the sexist, homophobic man who gets voted out of the game. Get the full story, kids. It's what I talked about on Patreon yesterday. Alexa, welcome. What do you think?
I'm just glad that I don't have to say Girls Gone Wilder in front of Andrew Savage again. That honestly made me incredibly uncomfortable. And I think it made him pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, it did. I loved how he was just like, that's a great episode.
He's like, yeah, glad you guys are doing it. But I actually I forgot because at the beginning of this, I was like, okay, they're still separate tribes. I forget when they're merging, but Roger is universally hated by this group. And I think you're completely right. In this episode, I know obviously there's the main content to talk about, but if anything, this episode actually made me really upset that Dina has not returned. Dina versus Roger was so good, and obviously neither of them were the main characters. They're not the winner, and they're not Rob Cesternino, so obviously they're not going to get as much attention as those did, and Heidi, but she is so awesome. And you don't see this very often where the person who's universally disliked is voted out at the merge by both the guys and the girls. So it is a happy ending.
It is a happy ending, Alexa. Wow, we are 2 minutes in, and I want
to let loose like this.
I want everybody to know that Alexa made the first sex joke, not me. I just want that to be known as we start diving into this podcast. And yes, this is why I get a little frustrated nowadays, especially because I know that when there's a massive reaction to a Survivor episode, there's a massive reaction to something that goes on with Jamal and Jack, 95% of the people saying that Jack is a racist or something on Twitter didn't watch the episode and just heard that little bit of controversy and are now like, he's a racist. While Jamal's like, no, he isn't. This is ridiculous. And that's what frustrates me. And when you look back, I believe this was summer of 2003 or, fall of 2003, whatever it was. This is such an easy moment to critique Jeff Probst. It's an easy moment to critique Rob Cesternino. It's an easy moment to critique so much about the way Survivor was and the way society was and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if you watch the full story of what went on here, it's not cancel worthy and it's not bad for anybody. I really don't believe it's bad for anybody involved because at the end of the day, what ends up happening? We get a confessional of Heidi and Jenna making fun of the guys because they think they're just so easy to pull out and they get naked for chocolate and peanut butter. And now they're going to run circles around the guys. And guess what? They do a pretty good job, at least in the early portion before Dina blows up the entire game.
They do. And I think what's especially impressive about the moment specifically is not to promote another podcast, but I was listening to Rob Cesternino's Evolution of Strategy where they talk about this episode specifically. And Rob describes the absolute dropping of all cameras and other priorities to find chocolate and peanut butter because it sounds like it wasn't there. And Heidi and Jenna dictated that. Mm-hmm. And one note that I took is I don't know why they needed to ask for to take their clothes off because everyone else did it without that. Mm-hmm. So that was just them doing what they chose to do. But Jeff didn't ask them to do that. Mm-hmm. And Rob didn't ask them to do that. And this entire season, the reason the girls beat the guys is because the guys can't think straight because there are just females near them. So they're the ones who are completely dominating.
And become a patron, patreon.com/Survivor Specialist.
Yes, exactly. Let's do that.
Because I talked about this on the podcast, how Jeff has said he will never do a men's versus women's season again. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact of, gender norms and things like that, switching and all of that. And now they don't want the controversy of a tribe of men and a tribe of women. And then, you have somebody who identifies as a woman on the men's tribe or something like that. But I think they need to find a way to do it again, because these seasons, 2 times women have won out of the 3 seasons they've done this. And the only season that the women didn't dominate was this one, Survivor Amazon. In Vanuatu, Chris wins, but the women dominate that season. In this season, the women don't dominate, but Jenna and Heidi use what's at their disposal to get further in the game. And that's why I'll always defend Heidi as being a great player and very underrated. And she was like in my top 80, I think, of my top 100 players. She came in with a plan and dividing these tribes as men and women, and having, half the cast be young and the other half be one, a school teacher who's scared of the girls because he doesn't want to get in trouble with his job, and the other being a sexist guy who is going to be the antithesis of Dina. That's fantastic. So I really think that they need to find a way to do a men versus women season again, because I think that they end up being more fun. And Henna and Jaidi, Jenna and Heidi did this as a part of their strategy. The same way Richard Hatch got naked in season 1 as a part of his strategy. It was a part of the strategy. There was nothing egregious about this. This was part of their plan. And I just think that unfortunately now we're in such a more sensitive time that something like this comes up and they probably cut it from the episode, or Jeff's not running to find chocolate and peanut butter.
Yeah. And I think like earlier in the episode when, Jenna, I think it might actually be after, but everyone's awake and like swapping campfire stories except for Roger, who's asleep because they also can't stand him. And Rob ends up, this is such a Rob episode. And like, you forget how much Rob owns this season in terms of confessionals, but Rob's kind of joking about something that Jenna and Heidi had told him. And he was like, I don't know, maybe I will go to the final 3. And like, sure, he's joking, but that seed was planted in his head. Like that, like to your point, like that was their strategy. And I think anyone can feel whatever way they want to about it. And I totally get why people don't like that, but they chose it. And I think that's the really important part. Jenna and Heidi and Shauna and whoever, they chose to play that way, and Jenna won.
And Heidi went to Final 5 and could have won the game had they not realized how much of a threat she was out of the women, because they're talking about, they're sharing sex stories. And of course, Dave's over there like, hey, let me tell you about the 974 women I've slept with, as he like slicks his hair back.
I actually love Dave. I know you're supposed to hate, like, no. I think as the viewer, you're supposed to hate Dave. I love him. I love Dave. Great.
I think Dave is a phenomenal character. I love that he's the exact opposite of Rob Cesternino, and that Rob gets the better of him. But at the end of the day, like, Dave's probably lived a phenomenal life. I love Dave. Like, Roger is the hated person on the season. I love Dave. I think he's just mostly forgotten. But then Rob is talking about how he couldn't close the deal. He can never close the deal. He doesn't have any interesting sex stories, let alone any he doesn't really even have any boring sex stories. And then it goes on to Heidi and Jenna saying, no, we would have a threesome. I love doing 2 girls and 1 guy. And Heidi's like, right, Jenna, as a woman, you'd agree with that. And she just like goes right into it. They're leaning into it as hard as they can because they know how easy it is to manipulate Alex, to manipulate Dave, and to manipulate Rob. Now, Butch is sitting there probably like, holy shit, where did this come from?
Like, this is not the Survivor that I thought I signed up for.
And Matt's over there like, all right, I got to sharpen my machete because I got to focus on something other than these women. But this was their strategy. And Heidi came into this game saying, I am going to show off my body, and that is what they're going to think of me. And she had the highest IQ on the season. It was higher than Dave's, who's a rocket scientist. So that tells you all you need to know about Heidi. She was using her mind and her body to play this game better than any of the men could play it. They did not know how to handle Heidi because they just saw a stupid little teacher with blonde hair and big boobs. Well, guess what? She also had the highest IQ, and she was playing you all the entire time. I love that Jenna and Heidi found each other because it made their story all the better. I don't think Heidi or Jenna individually do half the stuff they did on this season without each other, but they had that click where it was like, you know what? Let's drive these guys wild and let's make them miserable. And what happens? Then they go on to be on the cover of Playboy, and they end up doing plenty well after the season's over too. So I just think it's really fascinating how this all shapes up. back in season 6. Like, it really does shake down in a way that it would never shake down in season 41 if they were to do that.
Yeah, I don't think so. And then for this in the challenge, when because I forget, was the chocolate and peanut butter the first food item that was offered, or was food offered previously and then they were like, oh wait, do this?
Jeff said that there was going to be food. And then they said, well, we'll get naked for chocolate. Jenna said, we'll get naked for chocolate and peanut butter. And Heidi just went right in with it.
Right. Well, Heidi's like, I would actually really love some soda. And they're like, okay, we can do that for you.
Give this girl sugar.
For anything.
Just give her sugar. And then, Roger jumps off 5 minutes later on his own without getting any food or anything because he thinks he's not going home.
That was another thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know that's not like the main purpose of this episode, but Roger's like, okay, 30 minutes, like I'm good. Like at what, I don't know how he got to 30 minutes or whatever time he said. And he's just like, I'm out of here.
Because the girls jumped off at 30.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff told them at a half hour they were going to do it, and then at like an hour they have another thing, hour and a half they have another thing. So it was every half hour he was bringing out food.
Got it. Okay, I was curious how we got to that number.
Yeah, no, and so like when I watch this episode, and I watch this today, I think about my podcast today for the Daily was about how the ending didn't matter. The entire episode here, Roger Sexton is going home. They all hate him. He had made the homophobic comments in the episode or two earlier where he was talking about gay people and what do you call it? Alex was like, "What is wrong with you?" Like, it was just so cringy. Like,
Alex way ahead of his time.
Way ahead of his time. So they're having this conversation. It's all going on. This whole episode, Roger's going home, and it's one of the most iconic episodes in the history of the show.
This is our 6th episode. Has that happened like in 4 out of the 6 episodes we talked about? Like, we knew JT was going home. We knew Coach was going home. We knew Roger was going home. It is funny that all of these amazing episodes, who's going home.
Because it doesn't matter. And I think so this is what Survivor has lost, and what I hope that they one day do go back to in some sort of future. Because obviously we could talk about Heidi and Jenna being naked the entire time, but if you really want to talk about how this shaped Survivor and how it's changed and all of that, when you look at what Survivor is nowadays, it is what advantages can you have that can change the outcome of the game? What idols can we play? What steal a vote, whatever, who can we send to Exile Island so they don't have to go to Tribal Council? Every decision being made now is based around the final vote of the game. My opinion is, though, the best moments in Survivor history happen not at Tribal Council. They happen in regular anytime moments, in challenges and things like that. Nowadays, Survivor is 45 minutes long, and 38 minutes of that episode is them talking about getting an idol and rushing through the challenge so they can get the Tribal Council. It doesn't matter what happens at Tribal Council. Survivor is missing, I feel, the point that losing somebody every week, somebody being voted out of the show every single week, is already enough of a topic. It's already a satisfying ending. There doesn't need to be a twist associated also with who is being voted out of the game. Granted, we don't want a pagonging. Those are boring. But you're already giving a great amount of content to the viewer to talk about afterwards. I always think about it this way. Everybody, when they start writing movies, they always want to write a twist ending because they think it's going to shock people. But they ignore the hour and 45 minutes before the final 5 minutes of the movie, and it's nonsense with a twist. That's what Survivor is becoming. But if you make a normal movie without a twist ending, but that ending is satisfying for the movie, that's all people want, and they will walk out of that talking about it until the end of time. Mm-hmm. And that's what Survivor used to be. It was satisfying. It was a normal level thing with a very satisfying ending that you might have seen coming from a mile and a half away, but you got all of your great content throughout. Now it's all about how can we shock people at the end. And I think that's why we don't have these iconic moments anymore. Not that people are going to be getting naked for chocolate and peanut butter or lying about their dead grandmother or anything like that, but we're not giving them the opportunity to even do those things because all we're really seeing is what's going on to get an idol or an advantage to then go to Tribal Council and try to flip the game.
Yeah. And I think you're right about the storytelling, because this episode, like the name of the episode is about this moment. We're talking about this moment. But to your point, the beginning of this episode is the merge, which is super exciting in a men versus women season. It's Dina versus Roger. And then there's the chocolate and peanut butter that happens at a challenge. And then there's the vote. And they're all independent of one another, but do blend together and do blend into the larger storyline. To your point, I can't think of, well, I can think of two in the 30s seasons that had big challenge moments. One was the Sri and Game Changers, which was really fabricated and really pointless.
Hated
and
it.
Then the next was in David versus Goliath when Christian and Alec were going at it for 8 hours. And that was incredible because it's something that just happened. And Christian and Alec weren't going to let go. And Christian was just going to talk about his job for 8 hours. And Heidi and Jenna probably knew that they weren't going to win that challenge. And we're like, we're just going to keep, we want chocolate and peanut butter. We know we're not going to go home. So we're going to do this. Yeah. And I think that just makes it more cohesive. And to your point, we all knew that Roger was going home. Everyone except for Roger knew that he was going home. But that wasn't the point of this episode. Like the episode is 45 minutes long. It is not just 8 minutes long at the end.
And they barely even tell us who the other person is going to be. We get hints that it's Christy because Butch, Dave, and Roger all vote for Christy. We get hints, but there's never any doubt that it's going to be Roger. We don't ever think for a moment, oh man, maybe it'll be Christy and we're going to see Roger play one more week. That never, ever, ever happens. And what's so amazing about this episode is at the time, you think Dina is going to win this season. You think it's Dina or Rob, Dina or Rob, Dina or Rob. Who's actually going to pull it out? And even though Dina has a very short-lived season because she gets a little power hungry, her whole thing about never underestimate a woman, all of these things, saying all of the stuff she says in this episode. She has so many confessionals in this episode.
Yeah, this is a heavy episode for her.
It's heavy, but everything she says comes true. It's just not her who does it. It's Jenna who ends up doing it because they all underestimate Jenna. But she's going to get rid of Roger, and then it's going to be Dave. And then if you notice in this episode, they leave out Butch a lot because I think they realize we don't want to keep saying it's going to be Roger and then Dave and then Butch because Butch is going to end up going all the way to the final four. But they're talking about how they're going to outsmart the men at some point. And what does Jenna do? She makes them think she's sick. In this episode, Jenna says, I'm never going to win an immunity challenge, but that's okay. Well, guess what? She goes on to win, 3 of them? Something like that. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. I think did she do 4 or 5? Like, I think Jenna's in the list of like women who have either tied or are leading the individual immunity challenges. And I know they're different. Like I know one of them is shuffleboard, but for what it's worth, she won it 4.
Well, she wins. I think she wins 4 because she wins the shuffleboard. She wins the chop challenge or whatever the version of it is. And then let me see. And then I think that she wins the 2 at the end. So I think it's 4. Yeah, she won 4.
She does win the final 3 one because she chooses Matt over Rob. And also, I mean, again, I know we're only supposed to be talking about the merge episode, but I think to your point, like it's all about Dina, and like Dina's a smart one. Dina's the mom of the group. She's also strategizing with Rob. But at the end of the day, Jenna, people did make fun of her the entire season, and she was by no means perfect this season. But at the end, Jenna knows to take Matt. She knows she's like the first person, I guess not the first because Brian Heidick really perfected that, but to actively take the goat, and she destroys him.
Yeah, she wins in the biggest landslide. And I think that's another thing about this episode that really works is while like in today's day and age, and I really believe this, that people would say that this was a sexist thing. All the male producers are standing there and Jeff's going to run and get them chocolate and peanut butter. If Dave said he was going to drop his drawers, nobody's going to run and get chocolate and peanut butter for Dave. Although maybe because Dave's a pretty good looking guy.
I was waiting for them to make a joke about that. And I'm actually kind of surprised that no one
They probably did. And it was probably cut out because it was 2003. But while people nowadays might look back on this and say, ooh, that's cringy or ooh, that's sexist. The entire episode that plays out after this is about how women are better than men. That is literally the episode that plays out after this. Now, I'm not saying women are better than men or men are better than women. That's not the point of this. But the point is there's give and take in old school Survivor. I feel like in new school Survivor, it's like, how can we drive this point home as hard as we possibly can? this is a point being driven home. Dina saying what she's saying and talking about how they're going to manipulate the men and they're going to beat them all. And it's going to be, I mean, she says, may the best girl win for himself when she mentions that the final three is going to be her, Jenna, and Rob. She's calling Rob a girl. But it's one of those things where, like, the whole episode's narrative is these women, Girls Gone Wilder, in every aspect, not just getting naked for chocolate and peanut butter, but in playing the game socially, in playing the game strategically. The women just dominate the men in this episode, and that gets overlooked.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know. I mean, I'm curious what the comments will say. Like, if in terms of like whether or not this ages well is another thing, but in terms of like this was entertaining, and then the man who has made sexist and homophobic comments actively on national TV is the one who is pretty much unanimously voted out by a group of people who don't even like Chrissy and Jenna don't get along, and they all still vote for him together. So there is a good that comes out of it, even if you do find that moment to be bad.
Yeah. And Dave and Butch probably would have voted Roger out had they known, but Dave and Butch were not told that this was happening because Dave and Butch were supposed to be the next two people voted out.
Right.
So that's, exactly. I think like this would have been a unanimous vote and Roger still would have never caught wind of it because he just didn't know. And, and I, you know, it is what it is, but I just think that, you know, I honestly don't think this episode ages badly. I think that people are just oversensitive to stuff. And I think that this is something that they're oversensitive to. I'm not saying everything, but this is definitely something that I feel people are just oversensitive to because is there exploitation happening here? Yeah, absolutely. But they did this on their own accord going out there and they said, we're going to do this as a part of our strategy, as a part of our game. It happens. And I don't think it's not like Jeff's like, well, we have chocolate and peanut butter, but only if the girls take their clothes off. Like, that's not what's happening. Like, Jeff completely talking to Erin at the Thailand reunion is way worse than this.
Jeff asking Courtney if she's still, there are plenty of Jeff problems that he says in front of a crowd, which is like even more insane. Like Jeff at reunions it can be quite problematic.
Very. And Ice X is back for the first time in a year. Ice X, he's back. It feels so good. He says, was the strip necessary? They would have gotten chocolate anyway. No, the strip wasn't necessary. They would have gotten it. But I think it was part of their plan. Their plan was, you see this? And you got to remember, too, on Survivor, a lot of these people have seen each other naked. That's something that we don't really talk about, is the fact that, like, remember, Cerie's looking at Shane's bright red.
Phil's frozen. I don't know who's frozen, if it's me or Phil, but right as Phil said bright red, I don't even know what word he ended up with. So that's hilarious. I really am not sure which of us is frozen. So I guess I'm going to keep talking. But to Phil's point, you know what? I'm going to reset this.
I guess I'm back. I don't know if my internet cut out. I don't know if it was Alexa's internet. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to keep talking. But people forget that they are just living together all the time. Whose internet cut out? Yours or mine?
I'm not sure, but if it was mine, you cut out the second you said bright red, and then just like your face is like in, and I don't even know what you said, and I don't need to know what you said.
That's not good that my internet cut out, but bright red area. Yeah, I know. That's good. It's like an auto bleep. YouTube's watching. Yeah, my internet's been wonky today. Get ready for that too tonight, John, when we talk about those movies, because it's just been weird today. I don't know what the hell's going on.
But they do spend, I mean, that's a lot of their, like, they're using the bathroom in the ocean together. So they have that they have seen, I'm sure they've all seen whatever they've needed to see. So for us, it is completely shocking. For them, obviously the guys are still just like, you know, the girls are running circles around them no matter what, but that is a thing that they do.
Yeah. So I will say, I don't think the strip was necessary, but if it's part of your strategy, it's part of your strategy. And I'm curious. I'm always curious, like, because, you know, like when Hatch did it, it made everybody uncomfortable. When Jenna and Heidi do it, all the guys are like, so
like if Alex was like, I'm gonna do this. Like, I am very curious what would have happened.
What would have happened? And he's a good looking guy. Like but it's just it is crazy how all of that just goes. How all of that goes down. Like the male body, gross. female body. Hello, what's going on? Like, it's just crazy how that's just the way it's perceived. And Alex and Dave, two maybe of the best looking guys to ever play Survivor, they would have been like, hey, we're going to get naked for chocolate and peanut butter. And Jeff would have been like, somebody bring a cheeseburger because we are not having chocolate.
That's the opposite of chocolate and peanut butter that I can bring for these men.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think it aged badly, but Alexa, do you think that this aged badly?
I don't know. I mean, I can't pretend that it's like, you know, I don't look at him like, man, that's awesome. As a viewer, like, yeah, it's like super entertaining. But I think you're right in that, like, if you just tell, like, I have some friends who don't watch Survivor, and one of them is like, oh yeah, that girl, she took her clothes off for chocolate and peanut butter. And I'm like, I promise there's more to Survivor than that. I completely promise. But I think, to your point, like, if you explain to someone, well, actually, if you watch like 30 more minutes, you'll see that it's actually the sexist homophobic gets voted out. Like, people don't think of that. I think people just do look at the one instance. I don't think it aged well in the sense that I don't think it'll ever happen again. And I think even in the other men versus women seasons, I feel like they were probably even discouraged, or maybe they were just purposely cast in a way that there wouldn't be as much sexual tension.
I disagree with that. I think in one world they were cast purposely for sexual tension, but I also think that a lot of the people who made it far in the game were in relationships. And in Vanuatu, if you look at the people who make it later in the game,
Right.
they're in serious relationships. So I don't think they cared. Where when they did this,
the dudes, you know, the Bradys and the whoever, the young dudes who are supposed to have the tension with the young girls, they're all voted out immediately.
The fat five aren't like, all right, let's go take it off a lot. Like, they're not doing, like, they don't care. They're all married. They don't care. And that's who the last five remaining guys, the only guys to make the merge are the fat five. There's no young guys to make the merge. And then in one world, you know, I think you have it's a little bit of back and forth, but a lot of the guys we just don't really get to know at all. And they just get picked off so easily. But I still think that it's something they could do again, for sure.
I wish, and I wish that Jeff would rethink his stance about not having a men versus women season. I completely understand the concerns, but I think that there's a way to, I think that there's a way to deal with the potential issues. I just think when it's like doing this is not a great example, but like if you do like a North versus South, or like blank versus blank, it means something when you feel it. Like, I am a woman. I am not a Goliath or I identify so much more as a woman or as someone from Massachusetts than I do as a hero or a hustler
or a healer,
a brain or a whatever, or a healer. Yeah, definitely not that. Or like a brain or a brawn or a beauty. So I think that type of theme, when you've talked about the verses a lot, Phil. I think if you're doing the verse, if you do something that people genuinely feel, then
you don't need to say it.
Part of their identity, it's more compelling. And I think when, you know, the good thing about separating guys as girls and like is like you automatically get the funny moments, the, you know, the guys fantasizing about the girls and like having the bubble thoughts, like that's hilarious. And like, yeah, what they're saying is terrible, but they keep losing. And the concept of putting the bubble of other people like above their head, like that is funny no matter what you're going to put in it.
It turns everybody into a high schooler when it's guys versus girls, because it is like the most natural instinct. You don't talk to girls, you don't talk to boys. And then all of a sudden you hit an age and then you start talking to boys and you start talking to girls, and you know, it's what happens. Like John says here in the chat, I watched the entire season preceding this episode today, and it doesn't feel that bad at all. There's a lot of objectification from both tribes. There really is.
There is. And for what it's worth, I mean, like we criticize Jeff plenty, but I think the first 3 times that the guys go to tribal council, all they're doing is talking about the girls. And Jeff is like, you guys are losing.
You're
like
pathetic.
You guys are pathetic. And he's completely right. And he's like, you guys are talking yourself in circles about which girl you want to date, and none of them want to date you. Yeah. And they also want to beat you.
They just want to beat you. Exactly. But they're all going to pretend they want to date you. And Rob, you're going to pretend that you're going to have a threesome with Jenna and Heidi. Get the hell out of here, buddy. And that's like what that's how they're going to act. But here's what blows my mind, right? So my sister and fiance are sitting in there and they're watching Love Island, right? So I go walking in and there's 2 people literally having sex in the bed with the dark camera on. And I'm like, oh, That's interesting. They're just like, they're just that. Okay. Like, this is essentially like watching porn. I mean, whatever. And it's funny to me, though, because that's like, oh, well, that's that show. Isn't that funny? Like, they're just having sex right next to all these people. But then in Survivor, two girls get naked for chocolate and peanut butter, and it's looked down on so much more. And is it because Survivor is not meant to be a dating type game that any type of sexual content like that is just so frowned upon? Where, like, you watch MTV The Challenge, nobody's getting naked in that show. They're also in Iceland, but you are rooting for people to hook up. Love Island, they're doing their thing in the bed. How is that any better than girls get naked?
I think I think you answered your own question. I think it's probably because like people don't, by my understanding, people don't go on Survivor and be like, this is a thing that I am going on the show so I can do that. Like, people, and especially now, people are cast on Survivor because they're obsessed with the game and yada, yada, yada. But the goal, like, I think it's all about the goal. The goal of Survivor is to win $1 million. And then once you get past like the whole Rob and Amber situation, I think even now, like, if you even look at someone with any form of romantic interest, like, you're out. Yeah. So I think it's out because and now it's not a part of the strategic game, but the goal is to get $1 million. And the goal is to do that in any way possible. On Love Island, I've never watched it, but I assume the goal is you don't win $1 million. I think that'd be hilarious if you did. But I think it just has to do with they're just like different purposes. But it is true. Like, I am no Bachelor or Bachelorette watcher, but I've seen Bachelor in Paradise, which is just like the trashier version of the originals. And it's like, yeah, they do that. Like, that's what they do on that show.
I know. And at the end of the day, Jenna and Heidi, though, doing this was to achieve the end goal of winning the $1 million. So
absolutely, that's
what bothers me more, is that it gets blown out of proportion in a different direction, I feel. And I feel like this isn't a black eye for Survivor, as I'm sure Dalton Ross will come out and say one day.
I think there are plenty of other massive problems that Survivor has had apart from
because I really think that this is my favorite season. I've rewatched the first 7 in order. This is my favorite season of the first 7. Definitely better than season 8. And it's just a fun season. And
it's even so lighthearted.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, even if half the stuff that these players are saying disgusts you half the time, there's always somebody on the other side, no matter what gender was just speaking or what type of person was just speaking. There's somebody on the other side to say, you're an idiot or shut up. And I think that's what's so phenomenal about this season, because it's just that basic men versus women. It's that basic drive for the women to show up the men, and how could the men possibly lose, but they're so blinded by how hot the women are. It doesn't matter. I just think, like, there's something so fun about this season. And for every time that Rob's talking about how horny he is, there's Dina or Jenna or Heidi to be like, man, they're so screwed. Like, they're going to lose because they're so horny, or because they're just underestimating us. Or even when Jenna says, well, it's hard being a hot woman. It's like being deaf. Everybody's there to be like, yo, Jenna, shut the hell up and never say that again. And I feel like there's a lot more calling out, and it doesn't feel like Survivor's definitely pushing the sexual tension. The producers are definitely trying to get them to say things, which is why Rob is the star of this season. But Survivor's not trying to push a message on this season. Survivor is just letting the players tell the story on this season.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like, I'm glad you brought up the Jenna making not a direct comparison, but Jenna saying something really stupid about being deaf. To me, that is way worse than what she did. Like, that's and she and Christy had and like, poor Christy had a really, like, pretty tough situation out there. The general treatment of Christy this entire season is, to me, like, this doesn't hold a candle to that. If there's something you want to get mad about this season, it's that.
But I also think that the treatment of Christy is so much better than people were anticipating, because like, not for nothing, once she hits the merge and once she swaps and Butch starts to speak with her whole game changes. And that's like, Butch is a pretty forgettable character, but that really is his, being a principal and all of that stuff, trying to help her out. It really does change. And I actually almost think Survivor was like, well, shit, like, now they're including her in everything. Like, this isn't what we anticipated. We wanted to see her have to overcome the entire season. And really, Christy gets voted out of this season because she gets into a power position. Like, that's
Yeah.
insane to think about. They never would have thought that. And Christy, even in this episode, saying, I made the merge. I never thought this was going to happen. And the guys are still like, she's done. Forget her. Nope.
She beats pretty much all of them.
Yeah. Everybody except that final four. Oh, yeah. The only one who voted for her here that she beats or doesn't beat is Butch, which, I mean, Butch is there because he builds fires.
Yeah, Butch is forgettable up until he almost kills the entire camp.
Before he almost burns down the rainforest.
Yeah, this season is so good. It's so good.
I love it. And I know Rob gets a lot of crap nowadays too, because like looking back, these things he said, blah, blah, blah. I think people forget. I give the same thing to Chris Doherty. I think people forget that the Survivor's pushing this narrative. Survivor is pushing the narrative of Rob as the horny guy who's going to lose to the girls. And while he does say the things that he is aired saying, he's also playing it to the camera, damn well knowing this is the theme of this season. I also believe if Chris Doherty gets voted out at Final 7, they're probably not going to air the things of him saying, you just got to get the women together and they'll just eat themselves. Like, they're not going to air those things. So I think it's what the Survivor like what the producers want to make the narrative. And on this season, the narrative was all the hot men get screwed over because they can't see. The strongest woman in the game, maybe in the game of Survivor up until that point in the first 6 seasons, she goes home because she gets too power hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it end up as? It ends up as the 2 really hot girls, the really horny guy, the really quiet guy, and the old man principal. Like, it's pushing that narrative of, in a men versus women season, it's the 5 kind of weirdest dynamic that you could have that make it all the way to the final 5 of the season.
And we talked about, I don't know if we talked about this last week with the like famous, I guess it was Sean Rector confessional where he's like, you got like, I'm from Harlem. Like, you've got the judge, like just this, listen to this extremely weird group of 4. It's the exact same thing with this final 5. Like, it's the creepy guy who doesn't even know what, and Rob, one of my favorite Rob confessionals is when he's like, I just send Matt on these little wild goose chases. The creepy guy, Rob, who completely changes the game of Survivor, Jenna and Heidi and Butch.
Yeah.
It's a great, and you think the ending is just going to be like Alex and Dave and Jenna and Heidi, and they're all going to like do whatever, but that's not what happens at all.
No, and think about how successful 3 of those final 5 are. Jenna wins the million. Rob has the podcast now, and Heidi married, what is it, Cole Hamels or whatever? Like, they're killing it. Those 3 are killing it. And I'm sure Butch is retired and probably living off a nice pension right now. And Matt's probably hunting people down in the woods with a machete.
They're and no one's been happier.
Yeah.
He's exactly where he wants to be.
Oh my gosh. No, yeah. I really do. When I rewatched this season, I was like, oh yeah, there's some cringy moments and everything like that. But I think when you watch the story that is being told, I think this story is different if Rob wins or if Matt wins. And I think it's edited differently than the way we see it because
totally,
like you said, Jeff is making fun of them. You're losing to the girls and you're just trying to figure out which one you're going to try to go on a date with.
Yeah. And that happens the entire season.
Yeah.
The entire season that continues to happen.
Yeah. It's very fascinating. Very fascinating. So does this episode change Survivor at all though?
I don't know. I think like kind of going back to the men versus women concept, like I don't think the thought process of, okay, I'm an attractive woman. I'm going to try to get the guys by doing something this extreme, whatever word you want to use. Because women, like in Ghost Island, Stephanie Johnson is talking to Jacob Derwin, and she's just like, I'm being flirty with him, and now he's going to do what I want. Like that concept continues onward. I think like the women manipulating men however they want to, I think that is encouraged, and I mean Parvati is created, so clearly that still happens. I think in terms of the actual moment, I obviously that doesn't end up happening again. I do think that is a bit a result of timing against Rob and Amber, because once showmances are not a thing, then the concept of like general flirtation is not a thing.
I do think the one thing that this did though is that it created this sense that you could become famous in a non-Survivor way for something you did. Because if you think about it, the season 1 cast was iconic. Everybody was talking about those 16 people. One of the most boring casts ever assembled. And it is iconic in every aspect because people wanted to know what was going on. Everybody was talking about the season 2 cast. Everybody was talking about the season 3 cast. The season 4 cast starts to fall off a little bit, but people are still very into it. Season 5, people really don't like anybody there. But this proved that there was an avenue outside of Survivor that you could use Survivor to become a bigger part of. Jenna and Heidi being on the cover of Playboy, and I think they were the centerfolds for this edition. I don't even know. I just know that they were on the cover, but I know that they had pictures in there as well.
Phil's got this at his house.
I wish I did. It's right here. So anyway, so they being on the cover of that though is massive. I mean, that is like
that's insane.
That's insane. That is reserved. Like that is Playboy bunnies and like the most famous of the famous who like did something that got them to that point. You know, Jerry Manthe, I believe, was also in Playboy, but in a different like way. I don't think she was on the cover. I think she was just in it. Anyway, Jenna and Heidi kind of showed like, whoa, like you can have this superstar fame just because you do something. And I think that's what leads to players like Johnny Fairplay. And the fact that he came out the next season and was like, I'm going to lie about my dead grandma if I make it far enough. And I'm going to build an entire wrestling career around this. My entire career after this is built around that. I think people started to realize that with season 6.
And he like loved wrestling too. Like he was just like, he saw what this could have become. And I think he was like recruited at a gas station or whatever. So this was also just like, this completely fell into his lap. But yeah, I agree with you there. And I think that part's like kind of short-lived just because like now when you go on Survivor, you're just like a general internet celebrity. But for like, I would say for the first, like, I don't know, let's say 10 seasons, because I would include All Stars in this too. Like you become someone after you're on Survivor.
I also think like the problem is now fame is too easy to come by. And
yeah,
I think about it right now. We have 47 people watching. Little look behind the scenes. But when we had Sarah Lucina on, I think we had 800 and something live watching.
Yeah.
I would bet 800 people don't know who my dad is. I would bet 800 people don't know who your dad is. Like they've probably interacted with these people, but they get forgotten, whatever the hell it is. We have 800 people watching it live, and we're not even remotely famous. So what I think is just fame has just become too easy to come by in any sort of sense, because once you're on something, now everybody's like, well, what are they doing? What are they saying? Can I go back 10 years and make sure their life is ruined? Like, this is what people are thinking now. Whereas back then, it was still kind of like watching the animals at the zoo. You were like, whoa, what is this thing? This is different. And then they disappear. When you go home, you don't think about the lion that you saw today. And once they disappeared off of Survivor Amazon, you didn't think about them anymore. So I think it did kind of change that perspective a little bit, but it can't happen anymore because now everybody's famous at least for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Or I guess just like fame has a different definition. Like to actually be famous is not like going on Survivor turns you into like whatever list celebrity. Versus back in Borneo, it got you were the biggest deal on earth.
Colleen Haskell gets a deal with a Rob Schneider movie. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, you're a household name if you're on Survivor Borneo. If you're on Survivor season 41, like 7 million people might know who you are.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. No, in Survivor season 1, what was it 55 million people watched that finale or something like that? That's insane.
That's crazy.
Now you're getting
that doesn't happen.
An episode. That's it. That's it. You're still 7 million people, but now like I even look at like Ethan Zahn, incredibly popular player at the time, comes onto our podcast for season 40 after it airs. Maybe we just didn't do a good job of promoting it, but that has the least amount of views. In my opinion, that's the one I'm the most interested in. That's the one that my friends are texting me about going, oh my God, you got Ethan. But he's not in the way that a lot of these new school players just become in as soon as they're on. It's very interesting how that works. So
yeah,
it means something different. But what Jenna and Heidi were able to do is kind of break that mold. I mean, yeah, Jerry was in Playboy and Colleen was in a movie and whatever else.
Like I think they even said in their like confessional when they got back, I don't know if they actually said Playboy, but they were like, this is big. Like what we did.
They said something about Girls Gone Wild, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, but again, what was Survivor doing back in season 6? They were letting the players dictate what was happening. And really, while people might look at Jeff and say, man, he just ran over to get that so he could just look at these naked girls. And the producers were like, damn right, we're going to look at these naked girls. He, as a host, and he wasn't a producer at the time. So as a host, his job is to be neutral. He's not anymore, that's for sure. But his job is to be neutral. He should be like a moderator. He should be, the best newscasters ever. They ask the tough question. They don't care what your beliefs are. They want to know. They want to get to the heart of it. They're not going to sugarcoat because you believe the same things as them. That's what Jeff's job as a host is. When somebody says, we'll get naked for chocolate and peanut butter, his job is to produce that chocolate and peanut butter because it's their game and they're playing their game. And that's what he needs to do. And so I just think like what he did in this moment was the best thing he could do. He wasn't like, oh, hey, everybody, how do you feel about this? He was just like, I'm going to go get it. And everybody else is going to have the reaction they want to have.
I'm a TV host and I'm going to do the thing that's on TV that's good for TV.
Good for TV.
Let the
players play the game. That is the key. And, if that's one thing people can take from this, I hope Jeff sat down to watch this and relive the glory days. But that's something people need to take from this. They just need to take from it. Like Survivor just needs to let them play the damn game.
Well, I always say at the end of these, trust your cast, and that obviously carries a little bit differently after this episode, but I still stand by that.
Yeah, it is a little bit different because Matt's got a machete that he's sharpening, and Roger is saying weird things, and Jen and Heidi are naked, and Rob's trying to get a threesome at Final 3, but
trust your cast.
Trust your cast.
Trust that no one's going to get murdered, or that won't happen at Final 3. Just trust.
I totally agree. I think it's something that they'll do in the future, and this has honestly been one of the most fun conversations I think we've had about Survivor because talking about these things is just fun. I feel like half the time when Alexa and I sit down to talk about newer seasons, when we're really live recapping, a lot of the time it's kind of dark and depressing because something bad happened, or we have to how do we want to address this topic that was the primary topic of this episode? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's not fun to recap those heavier conversations because ultimately Survivor is meant to just be escape, fun, all this great stuff. This was that. This was just, you know what it was, Alexa? The people who were disgusted that Heidi and Jenna got naked for chocolate and peanut butter, the next day at work, they went, I can't believe they did that. And everybody else said, that was pretty crazy, huh? That's what it was. Nowadays, it's how can we end their lives and how can we do this? It's so different. And it was just, this was just fun to talk about. It's just fun to talk about and fun to look back on. And it was an exciting time.
And I think I think we and you guys have really enjoyed this classic Survivor episodes series. I think it's also just way more fun when you're only recapping one episode and not okay, well, the edit, they did this 3 episodes ago, trying to force week by week into, which is just what we do as people who analyze a reality TV show, but to just kind of force this when all we're talking about is just how ridiculous Coach is, or what do you what we'll talk about in 2 weeks, why do you think that person made that decision, and how do we think they would have acted now? This one especially is probably the most out of all 10 we're doing. This is probably the most lighthearted and non-strategic in the sense of just this was a silly thing that happened, but people remember this, and this is a classic Survivor moment.
Yeah, and I just hope people at some point go back to these things are just silly. You know what I mean? I think that there just need to be realizations of some things are just meant to be silly. Some things are just meant to shock us and make us laugh and all of that. Not everything needs to be this constant war of oh, well, disgust. It doesn't need to be like that. And, I would love to see another episode like this where that an asshole is going to go home the whole entire time and everything before that is just fun. And everybody who did what they did didn't regret a single damn thing they did.
Yeah, I would love to hear from Jenna and Heidi how they feel, because one thing that we've been saying consistently is this was their choice to do this. If they were happy then, and especially if they're still happy with it now, then who are we to question them?
Who are we to question them? Exactly. And Alexa, somebody's asking about Rob's voting confessional. I don't remember Rob's voting confessional.
So because it was kind of cut out, or it was supposed to be cut out, I don't really know the conspiracy with it, but he's voting out Roger, and it's a really long confessional. And so when he says nah, hey, goodbye, but he says so much more to it. And I think he just roasts him to like the
Mhm.
nth degree. And for whatever reason, Survivor wasn't happy about that. But
I did not know that.
yeah, I don't know like the full story behind it, but I always thought that was odd because like Rob said plenty of like insulting things to people, and I don't know why that confessional specifically was so problematic. So I really don't know, but it was funny because Roger sucked.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know enough about it. I have to look more. I have to look more into it.
Although I do know that Roger knows his Perry Como songs. That's what I did learn.
Oh, that was, or like, what, name that prune? He said, what was it?
What type of prune? It was name that Perry Como song. What type of prune is this? Or I forget what the third one was, but it's so funny. It was
so fun. Like, what type of prune is this? I was like, is he talking about something specific? Or
I know. Like, was Roger talking about prunes? Like, what?
I don't know, but it was that was really
so funny. So, Alexa, you said in 2 weeks we would be back. What are we doing next week, and what does that mean for our future?
So next week I am not going to be able to podcast. I'm going on a little vacation, which I'm very excited about. So for those 13 of you who watch South African Survivor, that's also going on pause for the next 2 weeks. But Phil and I have mapped out our final 4 episodes of Classic Survivor, and we're taking quite the turn in 2 weeks. We're going to be back at the same time, 7:00 Eastern time on Tuesday. I believe it's the 23rd. Tuesday the 23rd. We are going to be talking about the infamous Fiji car curse, episode 13. I want to see if I can make a deal. The car curse didn't start with this incident with Dreams and Yau-Man, but it was certainly at its most extreme at this point. And nothing says Classic Survivor like losing because you won a car. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about how popular Yau-Man was, how much people couldn't stand Dreams. The Fiji situation, like Fiji in general, is a really, really tough season. And this is going to be a really interesting one to talk about. I'm really excited about this.
It really is. So that'll be on Tuesday, March 23rd. Everything else will keep going along the challenge. We'll be back tomorrow night. John, Annabelle, and I talking about that. We will also be back the following week with another episode. So Alexa will just be missing for a week. Yes. And then tonight, if you really want to hear an interesting conversation about what you have no idea about, listen to John and I talk about Darkman and Barcelona. I feel like it's going to turn into a heated conversation about Americanism, because I think John and I are going to have quite the take on this Barcelona movie. So I love it. I don't think John loved it. Tune into that at 8:30. It's going to be a lot of fun. And Darkman's the same Raimi movie, so that's going to be a lot of fun as well. But that'll be a fun conversation, even if you've never seen the movies. I'm pretty sure John and I are going to get very off topic as we discuss these 2 asshole-ish characters. All of that being said, become a patron. That's the big one. Alexa, tell them to become a patron.
Become a patron. We have been putting out daily content for about 2 months at this point, and we are not going to stop until we either have nothing to talk about, which is impossible, or until Survivor 41 comes back, which is like September. So we have been putting out content every single day for you $20 patrons, as well as weekly for $10 patrons. If you would prefer to be a $10 or $5 or $1 patron, you're welcome to, but you get the best bang for your buck as a $20 patron. You get monthly Q&As, you get access to the Facebook group, you get a retrospective, all of those tiered, I'm not explaining as well. If you're a $1 patron, you only get access to our Facebook group, which is super fun, but you get nothing else other than that. And half of our discussions are about our daily content and our Q&A and retrospective podcast. So at the very least, become a $5 patron, but genuinely, we are trying to do our absolute best to give $20 patrons a great value. And candidly, you are getting more content as a $20 patron right now than you would if it was in the middle of the Survivor season. So now is the time to become a patron. Go to patreon.com/Survivor Specialist. And that's my pitch.
That's your pitch. And we might have a change coming maybe as soon as tonight. We don't know. There's things on the horizon that Alexa and I discussed today. It might happen tonight. It might happen tomorrow. Who knows? But keep an eye out for that in the future. But tune in 8:30 tonight. And if you're not a movie fan, tell your movie fan friends, because John gives great input. And tonight is going to be his biggest challenge yet. So
wow. I wish I knew or saw either of these movies so I could hear you guys talk about this.
It's better that you haven't. Just tune in anyway. That's my pitch to everybody there. Otherwise, I will see you all in 30 minutes. Alexa, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy your whatever vacation. I wanted to say staycation, but I realized that that's actually a staycation. So that's the thing. What am I doing? Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye.